Howdy, Ando here from Happy Life Martial Arts. Welcome to episode number 82 of Fight for a Happy Life, the show that believes even a little martial arts makes life a whole lot better. Are forms, kata, a complete waste of time or not? I asked my friend Sifu Randy Brown of Randy Brown Mantis Boxing, a friend of this channel, that very question. I thought the answer might take 2 or 3 minutes, but it turned into a full 1-hour conversation. If you hang in there, I think there's information in this conversation that will help you take your martial arts training to a whole new level. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get to it. Sifu Randy Brown of Mantis Boxing. How are you, sir?
I am very good, sir. How are you today?
Very well. You've been a friend of this channel for many years. I'll put links to your other videos below in the description. But for right now, I want to get right into the big topic, forms. Are you ready for this, sir?
I don't know. Let me get my armor on.
All right. Well, let's battle this out.
I know you invited me over for pie, but it's crow pie. So.
Perhaps, spoiler alert, you'll be eating some crow. Let's see how this goes. Starting way back, your first formal martial art training was in Taekwondo. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
And you practiced forms when you did Taekwondo?
Yes.
And at the time, did you enjoy forms?
I found them functional. I don't know if enjoy would be the right word.
Okay, but you say functional. How are they functional?
Well, they gave me a platform to practice outside of class. So I could only make class a couple days a week because of my schedule with the military. Mm-hmm. And when I was back at the barracks, I could use the form to practice.
Now, you're in the barracks in the military doing Taekwondo forms. Did you get harassed and mocked?
No. Other people actually joined in.
Really?
Yep.
So no one was laughing at forms there?
Not in front of us.
That's a great answer. Okay, so then moving forward, eventually you found your way out of Taekwondo and into Kung Fu. Is that correct?
Correct.
And were you in a form-based system?
That's all we had. Is I really wanted to do Kung Fu because of my experience in the military, which I've talked about repeatedly, so I won't repeat that. But when I got back into martial arts, that's the style I wanted, but I couldn't find anyone teaching it. I finally found someone, but he didn't know how the art worked functionally. He said, I can just teach you the forms from praying mantis style. So that was my only way of getting the art early on.
How many years were you practicing forms in Mantis? This is praying mantis Kung Fu we're talking about?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. How many forms did you learned in that system when you started out?
Oh, boy.
It's one of those kind of styles.
Yeah, I would say maybe just in Mantis, maybe 20 if I had to guess. I'd have to look at my training notes from back then to give you a definitive answer, but it's probably around 20 Mantis forms.
Okay. And how long did you say it was before you found someone who helped you kind of unlock the practicality of the forms? How long were you practicing them just with faith?
I had been training for 7 years before I found somebody that could help me with that. I was doing other styles, or I don't want to say styles, other aspects of Chinese martial arts, like Chin Na training, the joint locking, next to the forms training, but there was no connection. And then we would have sparring, but again, no connection.
Right. So what was your feeling about forms? Were they a waste of, they don't seem to be a waste of time when you did Taekwondo, because like you said, you couldn't get to class very often. In that first 7 years when you're doing forms in Mantis, where would you rate it on your scale? Were they a waste of time at that point or no?
I didn't think so because it's all I had. So if it's all you have, then you make the best of it. And they were constantly, I also started competing about 9 months after I started training. And I spent the next 4 or 5 years competing. So it was a different mindset. Once you get into the competition circuit, you start thinking about that. You start focusing on, crisping up the forms, or what new form can I bring into this? So it wasn't really a judgment until I had my own school. Maybe a little bit before that, I was becoming very frustrated. That was probably about 4 or 5 years into training. I was starting to get frustrated.
Okay. So, and I hope you'll share one of those clips of your tournament forms because I know you were deep into it. You were a serious practitioner. Your feelings about forms weren't just a cavalier from the sidelines. You were deep into forms.
Right.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
All the
So I
way
hope
to,
make sure you send me a clip so I can post that while we're talking here so people can see like, oh no, you were serious into forms.
drank the Kool-Aid.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. So let's get into that. So at what point did you feel that they weren't functional or helpful for you and you really just started drifting away from forms?
That would probably be 6 years into just doing Kung Fu. Probably about 6 years in. I
Okay.
started, maybe 5. 5, I started getting frustrated, but about 6, I was really started just throwing stuff out and getting rid of it.
Okay. When you say
I had,
throwing out, you mean just reducing the number of forms or?
yes, I had at that point about 50 forms that I had learned,
Say that
and
again, please. I'm not sure my Skype connection is correct. Did you say how many?
50,
50.
50 forms.
Was that all within the Mantis system or is that from other systems too?
That was a variety, amalgamation of different styles of Chinese boxing, like Eagle Claw, Mantis, Long Fist, Tai Chi, Xing Yi, Hungar, um, about 17 different weapons, and I'm sure there's Southern Fist, and there's some other stuff I'm sure I'm forgetting,
Wow.
but
So
yeah,
maybe if you had if you hadn't been such a quitter and learned 100 forms, maybe then you would have gotten some value out of them. Maybe you just gave up.
maybe.
So with all that training time, then did you just abandon them? You started chipping away. You started reducing them. At some point, when did you end up having no forms in your training?
No forms was later. My initial steps were throwing stuff out down to, I had noticed I was looking at any history I could find, trying to find answers, and I started noticing a pattern. Like all these systems they came out of China, they had a common theme, that one form or no forms or 2 forms or 3 forms. So I started paring down and working on just simplifying. There was a few styles that I really liked when I was doing forms. So I thought I was going to learn just the core forms of those styles.
Mm-hmm.
Still too big of an apple, in my opinion, now in retrospect. But once I got into actually training with somebody that we were working on the fighting application, we were still working on the core forms of Mantis. So I was still training forms for a few more years,
Mm-hmm.
but eventually I just threw them out, probably about 12 years into training.
Okay. So if early on you were practicing the forms for a little bit of functionality, then it turned into kind of tournament-based goals. So looking good and just feeling good and moving your body around, not necessarily fighting applications. You went through that period. Then you start blowing out the limits, learning tons of forms, but finding not much value in them practically. And even when you found a teacher who was helping you unlock the movements and figure out how to make them more practical, even then that started burning out. And eventually, then you said at some point, that's it. Forms are really a waste of time. I'd rather do something else in my training time. Is that how eventually it went to the most recent period? Well, second most recent period.
Well, it's bang for the buck. And I mean, there's only so much time in the day. If you have the ability to train without forms, then that's obviously more productive. But eventually it just became something that I don't need these anymore, and they're not providing value in my training. They're not providing value to my students. So that's where it really came to a push shove, was I don't have time for this.
Now, real quickly there, you just said you felt that you didn't need the forms anymore. Now, is that fair for new students coming in to say that because of your experience, like, well, I don't need them anymore, therefore you don't ever need them? Or do you think it's better? I mean, obviously you already made your choice because you have your own school. But did you think that was there was still a way to get your students to the same level that you are without having to go through the forms route, because you did spend a lot of time in forms and then you said, I don't need these anymore. Do you know what I'm saying? As opposed to saying, great, new students, you don't need these at all. I can get you to the same place without the forms. That's clearly what you decided, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, because when I started figuring out what the applications were and how they lined up, the fighting aspect and actually the functional moves, it's not like I don't do those moves anymore. I teach them, but I teach them how to fight with them and we drill the applications, and then they become part of your sparring. Mm-hmm. And something that really bothered me for a long time, especially way back when I started getting discouraged with forms, is looking around at other martial arts like boxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, judo. It's like most of these styles, somebody can train those for 6 months and wipe the floor with a traditional martial artist, because the traditional martial artist is focused on these forms-based training and solo training, which is solo training. So you're never resistance testing, you're never applying it to see if it really works, if it's functional, if you can withstand the heat. So when I made that decision, I had been probably doing jiu-jitsu for about a year and a half, and there's no forms in BJJ. It's just you go, you warm up, you drill, and then you roll. And the results speak for themselves. You can see the results, and you can see them far faster than anyone that's wasting time on forms. So it becomes basically the economics of time. It's like a student comes to you and they have not come to you because they saw somebody doing a form. I would go so far as to say 95, and I'm being very liberal with that number, 95% of all people that start martial arts don't go in there because they wanted to do forms, because they had some idea in their head like, oh, I want to learn how to do martial dance. They come in because they want self-defense. They want to learn how to kick butt. They want to learn how to be stronger or more confident, feel better about themselves. And when you get in there and you're faced with this forms, it's like, okay, well, I'll do that because this is what I'm being told by the teacher is valuable and this is what I should be doing. But you have this student that is only committed for 2 days a week, 3 days a week, an hour a day. So in that time, you have a warm-up, you have reviewing, you have drilling, you have learning a new technique, and then you have sparring, which is the bread and butter. So given those parameters, there's only so much time. Like most people don't practice on their own at home that I've found over the years. They have a class, they're busy outside of class, they have families, they have a job, they go to class, and then that's their time to focus on martial arts. So you have a very limited amount of time to train somebody. Throwing in forms, which is just going to retard the process and slow it down, it doesn't work economically.
The bang for your buck.
Yes.
Yeah, well, starting to slide in my 2 cents here. I think early in that answer, you mentioned that it's the problem is solo training versus partner training. Mm-hmm. Forms is just one example of how to train solo. If you could go to your beloved boxing class, and it's like one of those classes where it's like a fitness kickboxing, where all you do is hit bags and you don't spar, wouldn't that be the same problem if I have a heavy bag here at home? If I say, yeah, I'm a boxer, and what do? Oh, I hit that heavy bag, and I hit that speed bag, and I jump rope. You're not going to be a great boxer either because you haven't put yourself under pressure, like you said, or you haven't stood in the fire. So really the problem here isn't the form, it's just solo training and not doing partner training. Is that fair?
No, I disagree with you on that.
Oh, good. Go.
Because a form is techniques that if you're not learning the applications of those techniques alongside the form, they're useless. And when you're hitting a bag, you're getting stronger. You're learning what it feels like to impact something. I can't tell you how many people that I've seen over the years in schools that I've been in that just did forms that would throw a punch in a form and it looks like they're trying to hit somebody 15 feet across the room because they've never actually hit a bag, so they don't know where to stop the punch. So somebody doing jump rope is getting cardio. Somebody hitting a bag is getting resistance training. They're getting stronger. They're learning to throw combinations. They're doing the reps. And those reps are going to lead to other things that gain skills. And then shadow boxing is adding in combinations, where a form, especially the forms that I've worked over the years, they're not necessarily tied together. You may have a sequence, like a short burst. It's like these next 3 moves are a series of counter to counter to counter. But most of the stuff, it's like a one-off. Okay, I throw a punch. Okay, and then I throw a kick. They're not necessarily tied together like a combination we find in shadow boxing. So that's where I would kind of veer off from what you're saying.
Because you want the resistance. When you say cardio, you can get cardio from the forms. Strength, you can get strength from the forms. The only thing you said was the resistance from the heavy bag. That would be different. Because even shadow boxing is really just an improvised form. There's no resistance in that. So really the only difference there was the heavy bag gives you something to at least pressure test your something, I guess, shifting your weight and your timing and your alignment. So the bag at least gives you some feedback. So maybe the bigger question, it always seems to me when people argue about forms and the question for any exercise you do or any style you do, it's not what do you do, it's what else do you do? If you're a martial artist and you say, okay, yeah, like you say, I train 2 times a week, 3 times a week, and all I do is forms, that's very different than if you train 2 times a week, 3 times a week, and you go to class and roll or spar with a partner. So, but on the other hand, if you say, for instance, like if I want to be a professional boxer and you're in the gym every day or 6 days a week and you're in there 4 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, then hitting a speed bag can be part of that training program. But if you're training 2 days a week, I wouldn't tell you to go hit the speed bag much because, that's like a very small sliver of a skill set that you're trying to develop that really not gonna make any difference to you if you don't have your big skills right. So to me, forms kind of falls into that category. I'm sorry?
It goes back to that economics of time thing.
Yeah. And your goals and what is it you want? If you come to me and you say, hey, I really want to be better able to protect myself against an actual hooligan, an actual bad guy. And I say, okay, well, here's a form you can practice. Then I feel I would be probably doing that person a disservice most of the time, if that's all they're going to do.
Yes.
If they say, hey, I'm going to practice every day. I'm in this for the long haul. I want to be a full-fledged martial artist. Self-defense is part of what I want. Then I would say, and how often can you come train with a partner? How often you're going to train every day, though, and some days you're going to be on your own? Now there's some room for conditioning. You can go very deep into what kind of conditioning you want to do, and coordination and reminding yourself of your favorite moves. And then I think that's where the form starts to creep in. So then it's just a question, like you said, in economics of time and your priorities. I do believe forms can be part of a healthy diet, but it's not the main portion of your diet if your goal is self-defense. Is that a fair? I'm just kind of stumbling around there, but
no, I think you're saying. I agree with you. I believe that if you have a student.
Hold it. What? I just ruined my desk. Oh man.
I thought you really were joking.
Well, I was. I was shocked to hear you say that.
You're doing the Heimlich maneuver.
Solo training.
Let's try that in the air and see how good it works.
Yeah, I don't touch anything. I just phantom.
Yeah.
Okay, but wait, let's go back to the part where you said you agree. What was the part you agreed with?
That's such a rare instance you want to hang on to that. Yeah, right. If you have a student that is training all the time and they're completely dedicated, you have them for even 4 hours a day, never mind 6 or 8, then there absolutely is a benefit. And I don't discount that. And I think that I've slammed forms a plenty over the years in podcasts and on videos and articles because they're abused and misused, and they use it as tools of manipulation or power over other people. And it's a frustrating process when that stuff is involved. And if you do have a limited amount of time, it's a complete waste. It's like just elusive. You're grasping at straws. There's nothing there that you're going to benefit from, that you're not going to get so much more out of by sparring and rolling and drilling technique with an actual partner, especially if you have partners available. But even though I say these things as negatives, I've never said they're not valuable at all, or there's no value in doing them. If you have time, there is, absolutely.
Well, and I would think for you, because you're the school owner and you're the teacher and you're on the mats every day, it's easier for you to have a consistent training experience with partners. But for a student who can only get there twice a week or 3 times a week, to not give them some other means of developing skills at home, well, I think that would be the unscrupulous part. How dare you?
Here, I'm going to throw this back at you then.
Go.
Because in a class, I mean, you teach, so I have, let's say an adult, I have for an hour. In that hour, I've got to do a warm-up so people don't get hurt. So we do maybe 5 to 7 minutes of warm-up.
They should come early and do that. You shouldn't have to warm them up. Let them come early and do it.
We review, we learn a new technique, and then we have to get sparring and rolling in, which you agree is the more productive part of class. But where do you fit that in? Where do you spend time when you only have somebody for an hour, 2-3 times a week, and you spend, because forms, the other problem with this is, especially early on for people that don't have any athletic background, and even those that do, if it's completely different modality than martial arts, or if it's not, I've had dancers come in that could pick forms up really quick, but they look like they're almost doing ballet at the same time. So there's always some barrier that you're now spending you're dedicating this amount of time to that, and it takes away from that 60 minutes you have to give somebody effective skills that when they came in, it wasn't because, hey, I want to learn that form. It was, I want to learn how to fight. I want to learn how to defend myself. I want more confidence. And this is, I'm sorry to keep running on. I know you want to say something, and
I'm good.
This is one of the big problems I have with forms-based training in schools. When they're provided as the primary source of material to disseminate an art, it gives people a false confidence that they can fight. If a teacher is not specifically telling you this is not going to show you how to fight, or they're not dissuading you from believing that yourself, like getting some idea in your head, then it's leading to false confidence. It's leading people to believe that they're actually doing something that's going to give them real skills.
That's a big one. And yeah, tying back into what you said earlier about the kind of that unscrupulous teacher who's misrepresenting what the form's purpose is. So I agree that on the one hand, you should always ask, well, what else are you doing? And how much of those other things are you doing in your training in addition to your forms? And 2, the biggest question is, what are you expecting from the form? Because if a teacher does present the form as, oh, you came for self-defense, then great, here's form number 1. That's a problem. If, however, you go backwards, and I believe that the proper order would be that you learn something first. You say, okay, here's like if you're going to drill something from BJJ, right? Say, here's a leg triangle. So you practice with a partner, you drill with a partner, you roll, you try to throw it up. But now that when you can go home, you know what that feels like. You know what the pressure feels like. You can imagine the full experience of that technique. And then if you want to drill it on your lamp or the leg of your table, you can do that with some knowledge of how it's supposed to line up and feel. But if you go in the other direction where you say, okay, we're not going to touch anybody, but here's what a leg triangle looks like. Go practice that at home. Then it's like, then you could go crazy and delusional about, oh, this is what the leg triangle feels like and looks like, and here's how you counter it and adjust things to make it work.
It's like punching air versus punching something.
Yeah,
solid.
Exactly right. Right. If you say, okay, you want to learn how to punch, so punch in the air. Here's what a punch feels like. then that's totally different than you say, okay, first I want you to very slowly go hit that bag over there, that 100-pound bag of gravel. I want you to just go touch it a little bit, push it a little bit, line yourself up behind that. Remember that feeling, so when you go home and you don't have that bag, you can start from the feeling of it and start building good habits backwards, then come back and test it. Then go home and remember what that felt like and rehearse it. Then come back and test it. And then you're in a very smart cycle where it's experience first, development second, experience first, development second, as opposed to what happened, I think, with a lot of traditional martial arts, which is they reversed it and said, oh, you want to learn that you have these experiences? No. First, you're going to go develop these skills in the air without a partner. And now you're just in this vacuum where you're filling in your own blanks. That's a block. Yeah. That's a punch. No, baby. Those aren't either. So does that make sense? Are we on the same page on that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I agree with you.
Wow. It's shocking. So to people out there practicing forms right now, whatever style they're in, what advice from you, from someone who has been deep into forms and loved them, to absolutely throwing them out and thinking they were worthless in some scenarios that it would be worthless? What advice can you give to people who are doing forms nowadays?
Are you talking with the present situation or just about that?
Okay, let's back up a second. So you did release a video not too long ago about eating crow. So what is the most recent feeling about forms that you have had?
Well, now I have to use it.
Because
this
of the
is
pandemic.
We have this social distancing in place. We can't, especially for my students that are advanced, like higher level, that these moves are in a form I made. These are the things that I use and teach. So they have the applications. A lot of the applications are already on our YouTube channel. We've shown them over the years without being in a form. And they have a way that they can practice the mechanics, and you can get that motor function skill. You can learn the nuances. You can work on your balance, your timing. So it's an imperfect solution at the moment, but we don't have partners. We can't be in contact with each other. So It's a necessary evil.
Now, you were very careful there to point out, after you got through your painful withdrawal, you came back and you were very careful to point out that for your advanced students, the people who already know the applications and have already felt the techniques, now the forms have a place in their solo training at home because we're forced to. And what do you think going forward, when social distancing is removed, do you see that would still be functional for them and maybe worth keeping?
Right away.
What's the
as soon as it's over, it goes in the trash. No.
What's the response been? Have your students appreciated the forms at this point or no?
Yes. Yeah. Some of them really enjoy them, especially given the circumstances. Obviously, they would prefer to have a class to go to and partners to train with. People are missing each other and missing that social connection and the dynamic.
Sure.
And having a place to be. I mean, there's a whole self-discipline level of training on your own.
Of course.
You have a time and place to be. It's easier.
Mm-hmm.
When this is over, I mean, I've had this form for a while because of you. You challenged me a couple of years ago, like I couldn't come up with one. So against forms. So I had this in the waiting. I just didn't have a use for it or a need for it. And now I do. And so as I release bits and pieces of it week to week, it will be there for people to use outside of class if they want to practice that. It's not a beginner form.
Mm-hmm.
Don't believe that. I think that there's more value in sitting there throwing kicks in the air, learning your punches in the air right now, like doing singular things rather than trying to do some choreography that's just going to be confusing. Because the focus becomes more on the choreography than it does about the actual technique that you're doing. And if you have a form, let's say there's a thrust palm or a forward punch or something, maybe you do that 2-3 times in the entire form versus sitting there and throwing 300 punches in 2 minutes. That's far more productive. So.
Right. You're welcome. All I heard was, "You're welcome." That's okay. Well, that's a good point. Maybe that would be like the last part of my 2 cents on this. How are you practicing them? One, what else are you doing? Two, what was my? I can't remember my second point. What else are you doing? Two was something, and then this third one. Well, what are you expecting from your form? What are your goals from doing the form? And then three, how are you practicing them? If you, like you just said, if you're only doing, you do the whole form, which includes many techniques, then that reduces your practice time to just doing a couple of times for each technique versus, okay, here's this form. Here's the first move of the form, and this represents this technique. That's my day today. I'm just going to drill that part of this form, and maybe I can get creative and find different ways to do it, slow, fast. Yeah.
That's, I mean, there weren't these bloated systems with 50, 75, 125 forms. There was one style of mantis that had 125 forms. I mean, it's insane.
That is insane.
It was a form that a boxer handed down. Like, these are my techniques. This is what I use.
Right.
Before anybody, I mean, we take our literacy for granted nowadays when we look backwards in time at these arts, because they didn't have reading and writing, large portions of the population. They didn't have video cameras or the internet or anything else. It was, how do you disseminate an art? And at the time and place, it was a perfect way to pass that on to somebody else. Or another analogy that I like, or piece of this that I like to think about is when, let's say, inside your system, your skill set, there was one person in particular that was a bodyguard for a family that I thought of, because he created this form of his system and he handed that down to the kids in the family. Mm-hmm. And in that form, there's this escape for somebody doing a rear bear hug to you. I thought it was really cool. It's a neat escape. And how would you remember to do that? I mean, if you can't train with partners all the time, how are you training that motor function without somebody grabbing?
Right.
And you've got to have it in a form or in some sort of practice routine that it becomes something useful to you when you need it. It's like, oh, I know what this is.
Right.
And as you said, you can rip that out and you practice it 500 times, but that thing that form is your library. That's your encyclopedia.
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree?
Yeah, well, I think you just reminded me of something really important, which was, like you said, even in karate or kung fu, doesn't matter. The older masters would say that you practice one form or two, and you just go deep into that. And that all the different styles of karate represented different. If you're short and stout versus tall and thin, if you're young and really hyper, or if you're kind of slower and a little more, slow twitch, those are totally different styles of movement, styles of thinking, different psychologies, and therefore you're going to express your fighting techniques differently, or what you're capable of. Flexible, inflexible, strong, not strong. So you were never expected in any system. Perhaps it's easier to say a system can include many, many, many forms with the goal of exposing their students to them so they can start picking one or two that fits their body, fits their psychology, fits their capability. Then you just take that and run with it and go deep, deep, deep into that. So that styles were named after a person, not named after a school. You could say, oh, this is the ABC School of Kung Fu, and we have 100 forms. Like with Choi Li Foot, there's also like just an innumerable amount of forms in Choi Li Foot. But as a student, I think it's just ridiculous to think you're supposed to know all of those forms. As a student, you're supposed to come in and just say, let me find the ones, or let me trust my teacher's guidance to get me to the form that fits me. And I learn more about me as I train. Then I can find the form that I can take home and really develop and then turn into my own, like you did, and like I have done. That I've gone through my process, you've gone through your process, and I've kind of distilled what I like And I had done the same thing. That's why we started. I challenged you to make a form. I was like, well, why would I learn a form written by someone else's body, someone else's experiences, someone else's mind, when I have my own experiences in body and mind? So of course I'm going to have to develop my own in my own form. I'm very suspect of people who don't create their own form.
Well, so this is very interesting. So I agree with that entirely, and you bring up a great point. When you look at a system and it is somebody's art that they're handing down, like one form, like say mine, I'm handing it to my students.
Right.
That's mine. That doesn't mean that they're going to fight that way.
Right.
And the implication when you focus so much on practicing someone else's form is that you're going to use those techniques and you're going to use it that way, especially when you're talking like a series of counters. So a great example would be Yang Lu Chan's what was cotton boxing, which is now Yang Tai Chi, but there's a move called grass sparrow tail. That move is so high level. It's insane because that is 4 movements. It starts out with an attack, then the counter to the counter, then the counter to the counter to the counter, then the counter to the counter to the counter to the counter. And you know, especially from your jiu-jitsu background, that when you go to try to attack somebody with an armbar and they block it, and then you move to say a triangle, and then they block that, and then you go to the omoplata. It's the same thing, but that's being done in a form, but that's his. That is his sequence. That's his chain. That doesn't mean that's my chain. And this was kind of I'm hitting myself in the face and getting so excited with the strength.
Good solo training.
Before all of this stuff happened and I've had to use them again, this was maybe about a year ago. I was still working on unlocking some moves in forms that had bugged me over the years, the core forms of madness, things that just hadn't worked out yet. And I was just had this explosion of, oh, that's this, that's this. And it just was unraveling in a good way. And I was seeing this fog clear. It's like, oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And then after I got to the point where I just had figured out so many of them, I realized that these aren't mine. This is not my fighting. I don't fight like that. So why am I going to practice somebody else? I'm practicing a ghost's art. That, yeah, that was cool. There's a historical aspect, but I'm not into this for LARPing. I'm not into this for, dressing up in old clothes just to do that, just to practice some dead art or something that's lost. I want something functional, something that I can use, like you were saying. And that, I think, is you as a teacher, myself as a teacher, we need to teach what we know, not what somebody else knew, for one, because that's disingenuous to our students. And I did this early in jiu-jitsu. When I first started jiu-jitsu, I was teaching it in my school to my students as I went, and as a white belt, and I would put my white belt on to teach class, and it was everybody knew what they were getting. So just before the internet tigers jump on me and say, what, you were teaching as a white belt? Yes, because if you know something more than the person next to you, then you can teach them. But early on, it was now I lost my train of thought.
The difference between a ghost art and your art.
So in jiu-jitsu, I didn't have my own art of jiu-jitsu early on. Thank you for the reminder. Getting me back on track there. I didn't have my own jiu-jitsu game, and it took me a few years to start to get one. Not until probably purple belt is where you start to get your own game and you start to figure out the things that you do. And that was the realization that I came to at that point a few years back now, that why am I showing that move, that kimura? I don't use the kimura that much. Why am I showing this sweep? I don't use that ever. Why am I showing deep half guard? That's not my game. I don't play deep half. So why, when you teach forms, are you teaching somebody else's dead art or the expectation? And you brought it up perfectly when you said that person of a different height, that person's a different weight, that person has a different flexibility. They have to maybe start following us. They learn just like they do with application, they learn from us early on, but at a certain level, they should start to go in their own. That's where it becomes the art. It's not martial science, it's martial art. You make it match your body.
Right.
Somebody's not flexible. Why are you teaching them head kicks?
Right. Right. Yeah. These are huge points right here. Yes, in the beginning, of course, someone doesn't have any experiences to practice on their own. So you have to have some faith in your teacher to show you something, right? You have to learn the rules so you can break the rules. That's the old cliche.
Yeah.
So that makes sense, right? So in that sense, again, forms can be helpful because you can at least say, well, here's some techniques. If the form is like a catalog of techniques and ways to move a body, then there is a function to that because I have to see what the ghosts did, so I don't have to reinvent the wheel and just start from scratch as if I'm just building from nothing. Right. There was a good head start. That's what traditional martial art or traditions of anything gives you. It's a big head start. Here's how you hold a knife if you're cooking. Hey, if you want to change that later, try it this way first, see how that works. And if you have a new technique, great, like the high jump. Here everyone was doing the high jump the same way. And then someone said, okay, I learned that. When I was practicing, I was goofing around with this. I played with it, and I found this other way to do it. I'm going to start developing that on the side. Then that becomes the new style. Then other people copy you. So there is a natural progression of learn from someone and then take it under your own project and then transform it into what you can do.
Right. And it shortens the idea. I remember years ago, Holly asked me how long it was going to take her, or she asked how long it was going to take her to get to a certain point and asked how long it took me. And then when I told her how long it took me, she was like, oh my God. And I said, well, it should be half that time for you. And that's what I believe. I mean, if you look at, I think jiu-jitsu, again, BJJ is a good representation because look at when it first came to the US in the 90s, look how long it took people just to get a blue belt and a black belt. And now that time has come down, and it's not because people got easier or more relaxed about their expectations. It's that the teaching got better and more refined and more efficient, and people started to figure out shortcuts to show people how to do things better. Mm-hmm. So
the kata are coming. BJJ will have kata at some point. You heard it here, folks.
I heard last year that Eddie Bravo had made one.
Fantastic. He's a cool dude. And it's also, I guess, in fairness to anybody who's maybe upset with any of this conversation, if you are doing a form, and I did make the comment that I would be suspect of anyone who doesn't eventually create their own form, I should also allow for the fact that there's also a way to take someone else's form, a ghost form, someone you never met, someone you never saw, someone you never practiced with, you taking their form and finding a way to make it your own. There's also room for that. I want to be fair to that because, look, at the end of the day, you're grabbing throats and you're punching people in the face and you're kneeing in the groin. It's not like everybody's going to have this incredibly unique style that's so different from anyone else's. There's only so many ways to bust an arm or, attack the head. So if someone else has already codified that into a really cool sequence of movements and it fits your body, it fits your mentality, you make a couple of adjustments like where you're going to pull that arm or how heavy you have to be in a certain angle, then there's also room for that. So in that case, my critique of someone, if I'm watching someone do like a classic form that many people know or many people practice, is that it shouldn't look at some point like everyone else's. If everyone's doing like this standard version of the same form, then something is missing in the art. You're repeating the ghost moves, but you have failed to develop it to make it your own. And I think part of the traditional mindset is having that fear of being criticized, of having someone say, hey, that's not the way you do that form. And you're saying, well, how do you know me? You don't know what I do. And you don't know what I'm thinking and visualizing right now. And you don't know my experiences with this form. And you don't know what my disabilities might be in my body that made me change it this certain way. So anyway, I just want to shout out that it doesn't always have to be some brand new sequence that no one's ever come up with. It's fine to build on the bones of your ancestors, but at some point, make sure you're putting your own spin on that so that it is truly yours and not just an echo of a ghost.
True. And I think to reinforce your point, if you look at, say, painting and Chinese painting, you're not allowed to create your own paintings until you practice the masterpieces. You have to replicate the masterpieces over and over and over and over and over, sometimes for years and decades before you're even given permission to make your own art. So there is a value in copying ghosts, if you will. And I'm sorry, it cannot believe that it's snowing right now. Saw that out the window.
Wow.
Feel so miserable.
Work on that focus. You might need a form to develop your focus, sir.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, the white stuff is very distracting. You wouldn't know living in...
Those are not snowflakes. Those are ghosts of martial artists past coming to haunt you,
They're all
sir.
coming to attack me. But there's a couple, I think, good points of forms that were brought to my attention recently, things that I forgot about and that I take for granted. And they were, again, Holly brought them to my attention because I haven't really taught her a lot of forms. I did a few early on when she started training with me many years ago, I think 12, 13 years ago. But then that was around shortly thereafter that I got rid of them. And so now that we're in this position that we're using them again, she's brought up a few points that I thought were very valuable. And I wrote them down to talk to you, to bring them up today, if you don't mind.
Great. Yeah. Holly, again, is a longtime student of yours, for people who don't know.
And she's one of my black belts in Mantis boxing, and she has a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. Mm-hmm. And I think that one thing she brought up the other day, because I'm putting this on video, she's been watching the videos. She said, I don't know how you can just switch directions in the room. So I try to show the form from the front, and then I try to show it sideways. And it was baffling to her that I could just change position in the room like that and still do the form. And she has trouble with that. And I forgot.
Oh, you mean because some people train their form landmark wise, like you start this way, you always practice the same direction and then get confused.
And I wouldn't say some people, I'd say most people early on, because you're trying to remember that choreography and you have to be in that same setup so that you're not distracted by anything out there. And early on, I found that out the hard way going to tournaments. And then they would do something like, as often, like you go to a karate tournament, because there weren't specific kung fu tournaments, so I would have to go to open tournaments. You'd have this very small ring that they would give you, a box, because it was designed for the karate forms or the taekwondo forms. And the kung fu forms are like confetti or
right.
The spaghetti monster is spilling out. They go everywhere. And they're long. The roads sometimes 15, 16 moves in one direction. So I would be blowing myself out of the ring, and you would get penalized in the rules of the tournament. If you went outside the ring, you would get docked points or be disqualified. So I found that out the hard way, and I would have to do stuff like do diagonal in the box. I would have to ask permission. And I would go corner to corner, so I would get a little bit more length and try to compact my movements down to fit.
Smart.
So this really messed with me the first couple times it happened. So the tool that I used was I started changing directions, doing the forms facing backwards, sideways, and whether it was in the school, and I would do them outside, and I would always mix it up to try to break that. But I had completely forgotten about any of that. Until she said, I don't know how you can change directions. I was like, oh my God, I didn't even remember that.
That's funny. I just did a video about that last year. Yeah, how to remember forms. I've done the same thing.
We had all the chaos with the house, so my apologies for missing that one. But
no. It's good to hear it again.
Please send it because I'd like to watch it.
Sure.
The other that was brought to my attention was coordination. Not from Holly, but from some other students that are really struggling with how to do these moves because they haven't trained this way. And you stop and you realize how much effort that actually takes, and mental effort as well as physical, for people to wrap their head around that choreography.
Mm-hmm.
That was another one that was thrown back in my face recently about, oh, so that's another benefit of doing forms.
Wow, that's two. Okay, so internal focus versus external focus, and now two, coordination. Okay.
Coordination, I have two more. And one I just did a podcast on yesterday. I released it about you have to do that move over and over when you train. You guys can watch my podcast about it, but it's our brain on solo training.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens outside of the mats when you're at home, if you're not working on that move over and over. I think you brought this up earlier. You're not practicing that triangle, that armbar, that punch, that takedown in the air. You're not getting that motor function. You're not getting that the reps in. So when you go to try to actually apply it in sparring or rolling, you're 3 seconds behind the curve.
Right.
So that was another point. And the last one was kind of interesting. Holly brought this up again, was the names of the moves. Doing the form and reciting the poem that goes with it. And I don't know if this is unique to just Chinese boxing. I don't remember it in Taekwondo, and I know you did a lot more Taekwondo than I did. Did they have names?
Not like the poetic names, not at least in the Taekwondo that I learned, or even in the karate that I've learned, but certainly like in Kempo and the Chinese styles, that illustrative titles for movements, I think, is so instructive. People mock it. Oh, it's the eagle this and it's the tiger does this, but that's the way you can remember these things. So okay, you remembered that as well.
And I would say anybody who mocks that, look up the word mnemonics. And
can you spell that for us? Because that's a tough one. you don't have to. I'll put it below. I'll find it.
N-E-M. O-N-I-C. Saying the names of the moves as she's practicing the form gives her recognition. Yeah. So when I'm teaching in class, she brought up that sometimes I'll name a move and I'll say it or I'll show it. And she's like, what is that move? And she starts thinking about that instead of what I'm actually showing or what the application is. So it's a distraction almost. So when you're doing the form and you're reciting the names of the moves, her point was it helps her so that, oh, that's that. Okay, I got it. Yep, I can see that.
Makes total sense. Even in BJJ, just the very smallest example of that, saying leg triangle, to actually make the shape with your legs and see the triangle and then see how you shrink that triangle, that helps. So you're not just throwing your legs up and you're making kind of a diamond. Well, that's not a leg triangle. So that connection between your mind and your body to be able to see and name and identify what your body is doing absolutely is helpful. And the Chinese just took it to the nth degree. It was not just geometry or numbers, or it's the actual, like the feeling of it sometimes. That's where the animal powers come in. I never was into the idea that you're actually mimicking animals. It was more that you're mimicking the spirit of the feeling of being ferocious or really focused or gripping something, ripping it apart. What's that?
I said that's a whole other subject.
Yeah, we'll get into that on another video, but there is value to it. So that's a wonderful list of 4 things. I cannot believe you just went through 4 Who are you? Is this an imposter?
I've been locked in this house. What do you expect now?
You know you're wearing your branded shirt while you say these things about these nice things about forms. People who listen
I had that on.
People who are going to be very confused if they listen to your other videos. This is wonderful. So do you feel this has been a very productive? The pandemic has been good for you.
That's some sort of bait.
Yes, of course.
Oh, people are dying, and this guy's saying how great this is.
Yeah, that'll be the clip I put on Instagram, please. Say the pandemic has been great. Just say that, and we can be done.
This whole podcast was just for that
just
moment.
For that, to set up.
Funny. Yeah, nice try. 45 minutes to set that up. Yeah, but back to your point about BJJ with the names. I'm going to throw Holly under the bus here because it's a really funny story. But back when we were all white belts, she would be rolling with people, and she would she would see the move that she needed to do, the submission, and she would yell it out, Americana, and then she would go for it.
Oh.
So we would always know that she was going to do it.
Wow.
Because call it out loud.
Wow.
Just to herself remember. So.
Well, as a teacher, I guess if you could just coach her to tighten up that timing between words and action, it's actually okay. I think it's actually pretty cool to go armbar.
We had to tape her mouth shut.
Oh, geez. Easy. I'm pretty sure she'll never watch this, so you're safe on all of these comments. But
yeah, she's over me. She's not gonna watch.
Exactly. And I can understand why. Anyway, this has been really productive. I think I'm really looking forward to typing up some notes and putting this out into the world. Are there any last thoughts you have? You want to talk about forms or advice? I was trying to get you to give advice to anyone who's practicing forms now as part of their training program. What advice can you give to people who are practicing forms as part of their martial arts training?
Focus on one. Focus on, don't try to do a bunch of them, and also break them up. Because I think, I meant to say this, but I didn't want to cut you off. This was ways back. You had brought something up about only doing a move once in the entire form versus ripping it out and practicing it on its own. And to your point, one of the things that I recommend when people do forms is you work in small pieces of no more than like 1 to 4 moves. Because if you only, let's say that form had 50 moves in it, and only once does that specific move show up, you're only practicing it once every time you practice that form.
Right.
So if you break your form up into smaller pieces and practice in those chunks separately, then you can continue refining and getting better. And later, especially later in forms, especially the Chinese forms, because you could have 40 moves, 50 moves. So early on, you practice the beginning of the form 5,000 times, because as you built the form through, you learn more and more of it. That's always getting better, but the end of it's the newest piece, and it's not getting the repetition that's needed. So it's always worse than the front.
Mm-hmm.
That's a couple of tips, but I think it's a good time to be working on them, and there's a value to them in situations like this for sure.
Wonderful. Well, we can agree on that.
Face.
Can you see the cat who ate the canary while you're eating crow? I'm eating the canary. Yeah, no, this has been really helpful. I hope people will listen to your advice, because you certainly know what you're talking about. I recommend everyone check out Sifu Randy's channel. Subscribe if you have not. There's so much good content there. And we've done some collabs in the past, and it's always been a pleasure. And I hope we will continue to do so, sir.
Definitely. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure eating crow with you.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Burnt the crust a little.
Let's get some pie.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. At the very least, I hope it makes you rethink how you're training, just to make sure you're getting the most out of your time and effort as possible. Until next time, smiles up, my friend. Let that smile be your shield and your sword. Keep fighting for a happy life.